My name is Matt DeBergalis. I'm the CEO of Apollo GraphQL. GraphQL is an open technology that has emerged as a favorite in the enterprise for how to coordinate and glue together hundreds or thousands of different APIs and systems. It's essentially a query language for your API layer. And it's an architecture that we want to spend a little bit of time talking about. I have with me Praga Prakasam from American Airlines. And I'll give a little bit of context for this, no pun intended, and then let's dive into what you've done. So American's been a technical innovator since really the dawn of time. The system inside American called Sabre, if you've heard of that, is the world's first real-time business computing system. It was built back in the 60s to automate and manage how airline reservations were purchased and ticketed. And so at American, there's just an enormous amount of history and value and technology from different eras. And I think that's a good place to start, because before we get into AI, maybe I can just ask you to talk a little bit about what you had built before AI came to the forefront and the architecture that you had assembled to make more use and better use of those systems.
Sure, yeah. Mentioned Sabre, 1960s. I'm glad. I was not born during the 1960s, but I still deal with what has been created. Sabre is still a green screen. It's still on mainframe, but Sabre has been fantastic. They've created a lot of APIs that sit on top of that green screen, and that's what we interact with, right? As the companies have separated, you still have them as a vendor partnership. If I need a change, it takes a long time to build, right? So what happens now, we build a service layer on top, and then the product teams that again sit on top of that build the service layer. And in order to retrieve data or make these business changes, sometimes we've all done that. We add a little bit of Band-Aid, and we make some changes to rules here till we catch up with the changes in Sabre. So what it does now, you have inconsistent rules that is sitting across different channels, different products, and if Sabre is down, we're down, right? So these are two things that we looked at, and what this also drives is massive duplication. If you really see, right, if you're building an API in front of something like Sabre, and you end up consuming it via different products, now you're going to duplicate code. Even if it's REST, you're going to duplicate the whole plumbing, and you're going to pull that data, you're going to cache it. Now you have multiple layers of caching. I used to joke with my colleagues, right? Once AGI comes in and looks at all of our code, and if it takes over a job, the one thing that is going to really come out is how much we have duplicated code, not across, companies.
We're all going to get scored.
We're going to be scored on duplication. Hope I've copied the good ones.
And so you built a graph to handle that complexity and that duplication, is that right?
Yes. Yeah, I got carried away there. He started with Sabre, and I had to start from 1960s.
And what is the graph? What is that for everybody?
Well, when you look at graph, right, it pretty much is your business layer, what we use to build. It encompasses your business capabilities and exposes them as context to different APIs, right? So what it means is, as a front-end engineer or somebody, they don't have to build this plumbing. Now they just say, hey, I need these 5 values. Now, without the case of overfetching, I could just ask for these 5 values, right? The key part here is what really hit home is now I can figure out which particular element is being used the most. Before, the service providers did not have any visibility into how the data is being used, right? If I have 100 elements that I'm sending through, the service providers, all these people are using my data. But do you know exactly what pieces of information that they're using? We do not have any idea, right? So that becomes the key. Now with Graph, and your Apollo Studio can give me insights into exactly which data element is being used and by which product team, right? The nuance to that is you can build a caching layer, right? That becomes very important. Now I can figure out, okay, if the ticketing records are not changing, I could cache that for a longer time versus a seat that could change often, which I don't need to cache, right? So that is the biggest takeaway from that. And yeah, there's also security, but we can talk about that later.
Yeah, so you brought in a new architecture that it essentially sits in front of the systems of record, and it solves some of the problems around duplication and the complexity of talking to that, performance with caching. And now along comes AI. So it sounds like you've built, people are talking about a context layer. Mm-hmm. It sounds like what you really have is, and we were talking about this earlier, is an opportunity to feed the next generation of AI products the context that they're going to need.
Yeah.
What does the AI landscape look like at American? Like, how are you proceeding forward with what you've built so far?
So you just went right there for the jugular. But yeah, I'm sure all of you are aware, right? Context is the key. What AI needs is a precise deterministic context, right? Not a bunch of stitched APIs, which would lead to cognitive overload. We really don't want that, right? That's where Graph sat well. When we looked at it, I'm like, okay, fantastic, right? I just needed to give this context for this journey. Before we were talking about, I'm talking about reservations, I'm talking about check-in, I'm talking about all these individual domains, but now as an agent, it's going to work across the journey, right? And when you have to do across the journey, the context becomes key. And that's where the Graph has been fantastic, because now I can clearly determine what context I want to give by paring down the data elements, right? And I'm also not exposing my entire APIs. I'm just creating a separate variant just for Agentic AI. So even though we have a federated supergraph that has all this data, I can pare down the context just for the agents via the Apollo MCP server, right? For those of you who may not aware of how some of these graph works, is pretty much you can create queries, you can create persistent queries, and you could give that hash directly to the front-end folks. So now they're just asking for this data that they need. And with this Apollo MCP server, all I had to do was, okay, I need these queries that I've already been using. Take that, make it as a list, put some system prompts or tool description on top of each of the query, and drop it into the MCP server, right? And boom, we're done.
So you're not writing a separate MCP server for each of these
Oh, no.
AI workloads?
No, yeah, of course, yeah, we all start with that, right? But then our focus has always been in AI is security, resiliency. The last thing we wanted to do is every product team go and create an MCP server and maintain each of the bugs. We have to keep up with all those changes. For me, I don't see MCP as the agentic thing. I see it more as a cross-cutting concern. Mm-hmm. I wanted somebody else to deal with it while my engineers are focused on how do I make my foundational models functionally correct, right?
So just to make sure I have this right, there's sort of an MCP tier that's the connectivity, mm-hmm. but you're interested in what sits above that, which is what are the tool calls?
Yeah.
And how are those defined? And to be able to define them as a query declaratively rather than a new library or more procedural code is the big win here.
That is correct, yeah. Right? So I didn't think it would be that simple, Matt. When you guys told me, okay, hey, we have an MCP server, I was like, they're doing graphs so well, do I really want to use their MCP server? And I'm like, okay, it's just configurable. And my team was able to just deploy it in a day, right? And the only thing we had to do is write tool description, and we were able to enable the Agentic AI use cases, right? And the beauty is the security. I wanted to really touch upon that.
How do you think about security?
So again, it's zero trust model everywhere. I know most of you are aware of this. Now, AA has been fighting access to bots for a long time. That was my role in AA.com. One of the things is like we had hundreds of thousands of bots. Now we are like, hey, you need to make it open for bots, right? So we were like, I don't want to swear, but yeah. End of the day, in Graph, what we had done was each of these, like I was talking about data elements, we put scopes on every data element, right? And these scopes are now attached to the token, JOT token. So if you do not have the scope associated with your token, you cannot access the data. That added so much layers of security. Now I can go and we were able to create partner variants because AA is not just about air travel, it's also about hotels, cars. We have all these partners. So we doubled down on ensuring the right scopes and profiles exist in the graph. Now when it came here, MCP is now just sitting on top of that. I'm not building anything new. I'm just inheriting all those security scopes. Done, right?
Because it sounds like where this is going is you're going to have more and more of these agents. And they're all going to need their own bespoke, what they're allowed to see and do.
Absolutely, yes.
It's not just the bots that are external. It's also, I mean, what's inside these agents? Does anybody, how many people have read all the code for all your agents? Yeah, exactly, right? I don't think I saw a hand. So there's this new security concern that comes up. It's about exfiltration. It's about installing these things inside the firewall where they're going to have access to all of this data, but no longer can you trust the code and the software that's being built.
Yes.
And so you're able to do this down at a fine-grained level.
Yes, absolutely.
In a semantic way.
Yes.
is what you're getting at.
Basically, we would create these curated lists, and each of this list has, even if I give the same agent the same list for access, the security authorization is different, right? So pretty much you can curate for the same journey. If I'm exposing it to an external vendor, I could give them less capability in the tool, less data in the tool, versus what I'm sharing internally, right? That's key. You don't want to expose how much miles you have or your PII data, none of that, right?
And it's like we're caught between a rock and a hard place because the CEOs are, I can say this because I'm a CEO, like we're pounding the table saying, more AI, more AI, more AI, go fast, take risks. And yet, how can you expose this stuff, right? And so there's a tension that I think you're getting at around how you navigate that. I'm curious, having gone as far as you have now, what advice do you have for others? What did you learn the hard way or mistakes that you made that we can learn from?
Oh, wow. I make mistakes every day, not sure how much I learn out of it, but I'll try. Well, again, I've seen this happen, right? When AI came in, everybody got excited. We all figured MCP is the way to get into the generative AI world. What we found is that's not really true. What you're doing is creating these MCP tools, and you're recreating the BFF sprawl that we always did a few years ago, right? Now you're stitching together your APIs, creating a tool set, putting it in MCP. It's BFF all over again. So my suggestion would be look at MCP as a tooling layer, more look at it as a cross-cutting concern. Don't think like you're going to become an AI engineer by focusing on MCP tools. Maybe I'm not that experienced to tell you guys, but I would focus on making functionally correct, right? Context creation, focus on system prompts, or how do you really focus on ensuring your agents are doing the right thing? That would be my 2 cents.
And planning ahead for scale, like
yes.
if you think about because I'm curious, what's this all mean for the travelers or the business? Like, can you paint a picture of what that adds up to?
Well, they all go together, right? business wants to deliver features fast. My team wants to ensure that happens in a right way, right? Otherwise, we are the ones who are waking up in the middle of the night, picking up calls for the features we delivered, right? When it comes to travelers, that's, I think, is the biggest lift for us, right? We are able to meet them where they want to be met, right? How many of us do not like our PII data exposed, right? I don't like it. But the beauty of this is with this effort is I can tell the agent that you are a concierge key member, for example. You travel from Dallas to London. You like business. All those characterization about you is I could give that, right? Without exposing any of your PII data.
Yeah.
And what it means is I don't want to send you offers when your flight is disrupted, right? So now the agent is able to have this customer context, limited customer context, but yet make the right decision for the customer, right? And we are able to meet the customer where we want them to be met and focus on them. And kid you not, we were able to deliver features much faster. We delivered 3 agentic experiences in 90 days, one after the other. Now we're able to go and say, okay, next 30 days, how do I incrementally add? And all this being possible because of ensuring that we are focused on building the right framework for that. Yeah.
I think this is how a lot of AI is going to show up. It's about personalization. We're not talking about Claude flying the plane, right?
No.
It's not even saying, oh, you're going to reserve your next airplane ticket by typing into GPT. Maybe that's coming. I don't know. But this almost feels more useful. I just want the apps to be more sensible about who I am and what I'm trying to do. And I don't want to have to wade through every screen or every offer that just makes no sense in the context I got it in. Is that what you're getting at?
Yes.
A lot of this is about personalization and...
Yes, it's about building, and more than building, right? It's, again, like I said, meeting the customer where they want to be met, right? And truly understanding the customer's context and being able to serve them appropriately.
Yeah.
Like I said, right? If my flight is disrupted and I'm stuck somewhere, your airline travel could pretty much ruin your 6 months planned vacation. And the last thing you want to see is us trying to upsell you an offer. It's not good experience, because all of these are being disconnected before, right? We're all in a product. We've possibly worked in a product world. Every product is different. Marketing is different. And what this agentic experience does, it stitches everything together. It gives you a higher level of visibility so that you could make the right decisions for the customer. And I can serve individual customers now. I don't need the manpower to analyze it, right? That's where I'm seeing this going. Yeah. At least I'm excited about it. Nervously excited, but I'm very excited.
Well, this is the kind of AI I want more of. We were talking, just to wrap up, a minute ago, I learned this morning it's the 100-year birthday for American Airlines.
Yes.
So maybe we can end on that. How's it feel? You're at the start of a whole new chapter of what you can do for the customer and how the software gets built underneath. And how's that all land for you?
Well, I got my 100-year pin. I feel like I'm part of something that's been there for 100 years. It is exciting, right? The conversation that we had with our CEO was, what do we do to be exciting for the next 100 years? How do we be relevant, right? And I'm like, oh, great. I like to be relevant. We all love to be relevant. And I don't have to do a lot of work to be relevant because I could just focus on building agentic layers that can ensure that we're there, right? Personally, we started, like I said, right, what we started as to prevent duplication, ensuring resiliency. So I feel vindicated at this point that Graph is able to transfer, or I could just transfer that into the agentic world. So it's exciting times, Matt, yeah.
I think if ever there was a time for getting the architecture right for a big future that we don't fully see it's now. And thanks for sharing all that.
Thank you for your time, and thank you for
Thank you.
laughing at my bad jokes and listening to me. Appreciate it.